Saruman and the One Ring. This time we're asking the question, what would happen if Saruman took the One Ring and became its master? To fully explore the possibilities that could arise from Saruman wielding the One Ring, we must understand the context of all the things that are at play here. Saruman, not being fully good or evil, is one of Tolkien's most complex characters, but there are many factors which would influence the outcome of events. Like many other what-if videos, this video will contain many theories that are speculations of what could have happened based on the appearances and dialogue in Tolkien's books. If you would like to learn more about Saruman, most of it can be found in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, along with a short segment about the Istari in the Unfinished Tales. Who was Saruman? Saruman is one of the most powerful beings that inhabit Middle-earth in the Third Age, being the leader and the first of the Istari order. His being and origin are very important to the events that would likely unfold if he were to possess the One Ring. Istari are originally beings called Maiar, created by the mighty Valar, godlike beings created by the oldest and most powerful being, Eru Ilúvatar, who shaped the world and its nature. The fates and even physical appearances of the Maiar were different depending on which path they chose to take. Notable Maiar that existed before the Third Age had begun were Sauron, then known as Mairon, under the guise of an elf; Melian, wife of Thingol, and the mother of Lúthien. Also the Balrogs, that appeared in the great battles of the First Age, were also Maiar, who had fallen under the dominion of darkness. During the Third Age, the Valar assigned a few of the Maiar to the task of opposing the threat of Sauron's might that began to grow anew. These became known as Istari. They were to take the guise of old men that looked wearied by time, taking upon themselves the vulnerabilities of life like hunger and cold. They were to travel the lands of Middle-earth, learning its lore and advising the allies on how to defend themselves from and defeat the powers of Sauron. There were 5 Istari, and they included Saruman the White, Gandalf the Grey, Radagast the Brown, and 2 others known as the Blue Wizards, whose fates and deeds are largely unknown in the legendarium. In order to find out what effect the One Ring would have on Saruman and how it would be used by him, we have to analyze the character and see how he is different from anyone else that might be in that position. Many people believe that Saruman was a servant of Sauron that got corrupted and manipulated into working for him to find and steal the One Ring, but this could not be further from the truth. And it can be argued that he put more effort into destroying Sauron than any other of his order. Before arriving at Middle-earth in the shape of an Istari, Saruman was the first Maiar who had stated his interest in taking on this mission. Both himself and Sauron were pupils of Aule, the Valar of creation and craftsmanship, and both were 2 of Aule's most skilled beings. Aule is special among the Valar, as he is the creator of the dwarves, which happened long before the awakening of the elves. When found out, as a sign of respect and servitude, Aule was prepared to destroy the dwarves, as to not disrespect the will of Eru Ilúvatar. Eru, seeing Aule humbled, allowed him to keep his creations, as long as they remained asleep until after the elves awakened. This is not to be taken lightly, as creation is seen as divine and in its most complex form, unimitable even by the Creator himself. Allowing one's creation to be destroyed would only occur in times of dire need, similar to Feanor's Silmarils or the swan boats of the Teleri. By Saruman stepping forward as one of Aule's creations to destroy Sauron, another of his creations, we see a poetic resemblance of the time when Aule offered to destroy the dwarves. Based on their history and experience, Saruman was the only one knowledgeable enough to oppose Sauron. After Saruman decided to undertake this task, the Istari order was established during the Council of the Valar. It was agreed that 3 should be sent to Middle-earth for this mission, but only 2 stepped forward. First was Saruman, assigned by Aule, and the second was Alatar, the Blue Wizard assigned by Orome. Gandalf, happening to be present at the events of the council, is asked by Manwë to also join the task, to which he is hesitant, stating that he is too weak and too afraid of Sauron, to which Manwë states that that is more of a reason for him to go as the third. To this, Varda, the wife of Manwë, replies that he is to be sent, but not as the third. It is said that Saruman remembered these words, and it was one of the reasons for his resentment towards Gandalf. It was also stated that Gandalf was chosen because he is particularly fond of the Eldar, which would later prove useful to his quest. Yavanna, the wife of Aule, begged Saruman to take Radagast with him. He agreed, although he was not pleased with the decision, later showing distaste for Radagast. The second blue wizard joined as requested by the first. This established the 5 members, who left for Middle-earth. In the Unfinished Tales, in the chapter about the Istari, it is said, "Of this order the number is unknown, but of those that came to the north of Middle-earth, where there was most hope, because of the remnant of the Dunedain and of the Eldar that abode there, the chiefs were 5. This implies that more messengers of that kind appeared in the tale, the events of which are not stated in any of Tolkien's works, therefore it is agreed that there were only 5. Saruman is said to have arrived first, before the others, during the year 1000 of the First Age, with the others arriving shortly after. Only Círdan, one of the Teleri Eldar, and master of the Grey Havens, and guardian of the Ring of Power, Narya, knew the identity and origin of the Istari. It is said that Círdan saw further and deeper than any other in Middle-earth, which would explain why he chose Gandalf as the person to take over guardianship and use of the Red Ring of Power. It is important to pay attention to what he says exactly after he gives Gandalf the ring. "For great labours and perils lie before you, and lest your task prove too great and wearisome, take this ring for your aid and comfort. It was entrusted to me only to keep secret, and here upon the west shores it is idle. But I deem that in days ere long to come, it should be in nobler hands than mine, that may wield it for the kindling of all hearts to courage." Círdan, seeing further than anyone else, knew about the nature of Gandalf and the role he had to play in the events to come, as a travelling pilgrim who rallies allies together and kindles courage in their hearts. This was a crucial point in the relationship between Gandalf and Saruman, as the latter found out about the ring being passed to Gandalf and began to resent him for it. Quote, "The White Messenger, Saruman, after a time became aware of this gift and begrudged it, and it was the beginning of the hidden ill will that he bore to the Grey, which afterwards became manifest." It is commonly known that Saruman's corruption and resentment began from the jealousy of Gandalf, but it is interesting to analyze why he would harbor such a resentment. Saruman, as a pupil of Aule, had particular expertise with craft and rings of power, and he was the first to step forward to the task. Gandalf did not want to be part of this, openly stating his weakness and fear. As soon as Saruman arrived to the western shores, he journeyed to the far east, along with the 2 blue wizards, but only he returned. Upon this time he spent many years studying the scrolls of Gondor's archive. In contrast, Gandalf remained relatively local and took the task of befriending the small folk and assisting with their troubles. This to Saruman must have felt like betrayal, as he was most suited to be granted the Red Ring based on his expertise and his dedication and effort in pursuing his mission. Saruman was displeased in Radagast for abandoning the mission and focusing on befriending the creatures of the forest. To his mind, what Gandalf was doing must have been no better. With Radagast and Gandalf seemingly preoccupied with their own matters, and the blue wizards vanishing in the east, never to be mentioned, Saruman was the only one left of the Order who still made pursuing Sauron his priority, even though the others helped in their own ways. Later, when Saruman finds out about the events and fate of the One Ring in the Shire and Gandalf's involvement in the matter, he suspects Gandalf in betraying the cause. This happens before Saruman reveals his intentions. Therefore, to him, Gandalf hiding information about the One Ring had no purpose. Based on the task at hand and the events that lead to it, Saruman, to him, was rightfully suspicious of everyone. As to him, it must have seemed that everyone was plotting against him and his efforts. While searching through the scrolls of Gondor, he finds that a Palantir is situated in the tower of Orthanc in Rohan. He soon assumes the guardianship of the tower, receiving the keys from the Rohan chiefs and establishing a relationship with them. It is important to know that the Palantir in Orthanc was not yet swayed by the power of Sauron, as Sauron was stationed in Mirkwood in Dol Guldur under the guise of the Necromancer. Only after he relocated to Mordor did he establish contact with Saruman. Until then, Saruman acts independently toward his goal. In order to combat the power of Sauron, Saruman leads the White Council himself, along with the Istari Gandalf and also Galadriel of Lothlorien, Círdan of the Havens, and Elrond Half-Elven. Saruman, being the leader of the White Council, prevents them from attacking Dol Guldur, even though he knows that it is Sauron who is growing his power. His motivation for staying idle is for Sauron to amass his strength, so that the One Ring may reveal itself. In the appendix of The Lord of the Rings, in the part where Aragorn Elasar, in reorganizing the lands of Middle-earth, it is stated that upon looking through Orthanc, they find Isildur's armor and the chain that was said to carry the One Ring on it. By this it is known that Saruman was in secret looking for information regarding the whereabouts of the ring. After the ring was stolen by Bilbo in the year 2941, and Sauron's forces are seen looking and searching for something near Pelennor Fields, where the last known battle of Isildur is known to have taken place, Saruman realizes that his plan has worked. The ring is revealed. Therefore, he decides to launch an attack by the White Council upon the Necromancer in Dol Guldur. After being defeated, Sauron's spirit travels to Mordor, where he establishes his final fortress. This turn of events signifies that Saruman was determined to find the ring before Sauron, and that he had not allied with the Dark Lord, as he indeed attacks his fortress and vanquishes him. Saruman, being the master of law, must know that finding the ring is the only way to defeat Sauron. If an attempt was made to defeat Sauron and the ring remained lost, his spirit would forever wander and find a way to be manifested again, as a great part of his power lies within the ring. Finding the ring and becoming its master was the only way of destroying Sauron, aside from destroying the ring. For Saruman, as a student of Aule, destroying the ring would be painful, as it is one of, if not the greatest creation of his superior. It would be equivalent to Aule destroying the dwarves, or Fëanor destroying the Silmarils. For Saruman, taking the dominion of the ring and destroying Sauron was the only option which he would consider, and he, compared to all of the allies, had the biggest chance of achieving this goal. Pretending to align himself with Sauron would also bring him closer to the Rings of Power that are already controlled by the Dark Lord, this being the 9 Rings of Men and the 3 Dwarven Rings that remained. Many would say that possessing the One Ring would instantly corrupt Saruman and turn him to the servitude of Sauron, but this is not necessarily so. Saruman was a Maiar, just as Sauron was, and they were both pupils of the same Valar. He would be the only existing person in Middle-earth that could potentially be accustomed to the powers that ring holds. The ring does not necessarily corrupt its wielder into pure evil, but rather amplifies the powers of its user. Isildur, while in possession of the ring, is told to expand the kingdom of Gondor, while Bilbo carried the ring for many years, and when it is time to let it go, he does not find it incredibly hard, he himself deciding that it is wise to let it go. Using his extended life, Bilbo does not use it to carry out evil deeds, but rather to write songs and tales of the travels he had. Similarly, the 9 rings that have corrupted men into becoming ringwraiths also did not corrupt the users right away, but rather supported them in growing their kingdoms and powers. Only after their lives as men were over, their spirits remained enslaved to the will of the rings. The power that the One Ring gives above all is the ability to have dominion over others, this being one of the many arguments for reasons that Saruman might have in wanting to seize it. But this reasoning can go against the powers that Saruman already possesses. Saruman's power resides chiefly in his voice, a voice that with its charm manages to persuade and convince people to see the truth in it and agree with its wielder. Even a person as strong-willed as King Theoden of Rohan was swayed by the powers of that voice. This shows that Saruman already has the ability to take dominion over others and influence how they act. In that regard, the ring would not give him something he is not already familiar with. Also, he is the leader of the Istari and the White Council, which consists of the most powerful beings in Middle-earth. This being the remaining Istari, Gandalf, with his power to rally the forces of good, Radagast with his ability to find allies in creatures of the forest, and also the Eldar Galadriel, Círdan, and Elrond, and their rings of power. Saruman, at this point, was already the leader of the most powerful alliance that was known to exist. This fact, along with the fact that he could sway the lesser men if he wanted to, was enough to show that these were not the main reasons for which he wanted to take control of the One Ring. Additionally, Saruman being in possession of the One Ring would allow the users of the 3 elven rings to be able to use its power without fear of being controlled by the forces of evil. It is said that Saruman becomes evil once Sauron gets hold of the Palantir in Mordor and wins the test of will against Saruman, after which the latter supposedly bends to the will and servitude of the Dark Lord. But even this theory has its faults. If Saruman really bent to the will of Sauron, he would reveal everything he knows about the ring and its whereabouts to speed up the finding of the ring. But he does not do so, and keeps the knowledge of Isildur's final moments to himself, not sharing this with Sauron. Also, one significant piece of information is that once he found out that the ring was most likely hidden in the Shire, he did not mention any of this to Sauron. This is even made more apparent after the Witch King and other ring-wraiths come to interrogate Saruman of the things he knows. Saruman manages to persuade the Witch King of Angmar that he does not know anything, and that he should in turn seek Gandalf, as he knows more. The ability to persuade the leader of the ring-wraiths was an example of how powerful Saruman's voice really is. If Saruman did not send the ring-wraiths to seek out Gandalf and Frodo, then Frodo would not be inflicted with the Morgul wound, and he would not end up in Rivendell with the incredible haste he did. The Fellowship was formed in Rivendell, and it was that exact moment when representatives of different powerful races have gathered there with their own troubles. Frodo would not have found himself there at that time if Saruman did not dispatch the ring-wraiths to look for and injure him. It can be argued that Saruman's plan to play as a pawn of Sauron was a strategic decision, because in doing so, he would have the information from Sauron while withholding his own. This made him informed both in the strategies of the allies as well as the enemy. One thing that would be very useful to know is if Saruman had ever used the Mirror of Galadriel. The two were allies for many years, and even though Galadriel was more keen of Gandalf, she was still under the leadership of Saruman. The mirror that she possessed allowed the onlooker to see events that were, are, or are yet to be. If Saruman had the ability to use the mirror and look into it, this would explain many of his actions and motivations behind them, as ultimately his actions, even though considered evil and corrupt, helped significantly in the defeat of Sauron and the success of the forces of good, completing the mission he was assigned with. As a supposed ally of Sauron, he was his main force in the Western lands, scheming on his behalf. Due to the fact that Saruman was not fully subservient, the information and support Sauron had received from the West was skewed, allowing the allies to carry out their plans with more freedom than if Saruman had been a more loyal lieutenant of Sauron. One of the most terrible deeds that Saruman was held accountable for was the corruption and swaying of King Theoden. Because of that, Rohan was weakened and vulnerable to enemy assaults. All this is true, although it did strategically enable Saruman to maintain the guise of Sauron's servant, proving his faithfulness by manipulating the lands of Rohan, causing conflict between Theoden, Theodred, and Eomer, resulting in Theodred's death. In hindsight, it enabled the armies of Rohan to scatter, and only those that remained traveled to the Battle of Helm's Deep. As the battle continued for days, eventually Gandalf arrives with the soldiers that were scattered, along with their chief Erkenbrand, allowing him to assault the Uruk enemies by surprise and crush them as between hammer and anvil. This battle wiped out Saruman's forces, and along with it a significant part of Sauron's army, weakening his power. Saruman used Isengard and the vast tunnels under to create his army of Uruk-hai. orc-like creatures that, unlike their kind, could withstand sunlight and attack at any moment with superior power due to their larger stature. Leaving Isengard to Sauron would enable him to use it as a stronghold to grow more forces and launch them toward the surrounding territories populated by men, elves, and dwarves. Launching his assaults at the edges of Fangorn Forest, home of many Ents, Saruman provokes them to eventually join the side of the allies and give their support. The Tower of Orthanc and the stronghold around it was considered impenetrable based on its strong defenses and design. Only creatures as mighty as the Ents, when rallied together, could be able to destroy the fortress. If this was intentional, and with Saruman's foresight, it is not known. But by provoking the Ents, he caused them to destroy one of the most powerful strongholds that Sauron had at his disposal. The Uruk-hai were creatures that were superior than even those created by Morgoth, and the methods of their creation lie forever drowned in the tunnels of Isengard. After Saruman was defeated and his staff was broken by Gandalf, he travelled to the Shire, where he caused the last of his turmoil, known as the Scouring of the Shire. During this time, Saruman, then known as Sharki, gathered a group of thugs together, and they continued to destroy the buildings and trees in the home of the hobbits. This is a terrible act in itself, but in the bigger picture, the overthrow of Saruman enabled the hobbits to be more aware of the dangers around them and the vulnerability of their home. They banded together in a way unlike that seen for many years prior and rid themselves of the thugs and the wizard, with skills that they would have maintained for long after. In his final moments, he is ultimately killed by Grima, whom he pushes to the edge by kicking him in the face. Poetically and tragically, he allows the person whom he treated the worst to have his revenge and take his life, paying for his deeds with it. Grima's final actions are being able to finally break free from the clutches of his master and die as a free man. The Shire is then rebuilt, more beautiful than it was even before, with the help of Galadriel's gift to Sam. In this what-if scenario, it is important to know when Saruman would take control of the ring, before his corrupted reveal or after. It would be easier for him to take it before he reveals himself, as he would not have to defend against any attack from his allies, and can instead focus on destroying Sauron. If it is after the reveal, then he would have to deal with the threat of Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf, and simultaneously the threat of Sauron's powers. Saruman was prepared to do dark things in order to accomplish the mission set before him, something that the others were not likely to consider. If he did not make the sacrifices he did, more would eventually die and suffer as Sauron's armies would grow. Despite doing what he did not corrupt as far to be called fully evil and turn into a Balrog or some other dark creature. And despite being sent personally by the Valar, none of his actions caused them to intervene and stop him. Even after all of these actions, the allies show pity to Saruman and offer him redemption. But Saruman is proud and rejects mercy and chooses his doom. The way in which all of his plans come together is too complex and too serving to the outcome of the conflict to be called a coincidence. By taking the ring, he would likely focus on the order of the world, with many believing that he would turn every corner of the world into mechanical industry. But it may not have been as such. Saruman states to Gandalf that the new age will belong to men, and that they would have to rule it. It would be in their best interest to provide the men with anything they would desire to grow and prosper. If he had dominion over the whole of Middle-earth, it means that Mordor and the eastern lands would be under his rule as well, lands which could be utilized for building and machinery. With him still being the leader of the White Council, his allies would have possession of the three rings, which Saruman could use to further expand the possibilities of the world while maintaining its beauty. All these events and actions make Saruman one of Tolkien's most complex and interesting characters that are involved in the tales of Middle-earth. Considered an evil traitor of his cause, his actions have influenced the tides of battle into the favor of the allies. His soul was doomed to forever wander, but the mission that he was originally entrusted with was complete.